Should you buy a 7-string guitar, or is a 6-string enough? So how do you know if you should choose a 6 or a 7 string? The question you should ask is, what tuning do I want to play in, mainly? Leaving aside the fact that you may have other guitars, you should reflect about what tuning you want this guitar to be in. Of course, if the guitar is not a locked nut, like a Floyd Rose, you can always tune down a few semitones without ruining the tension in the intonation. But it's still important to have a home tuning, so to speak, so that you can set your intonation and neck relief to match that particular tuning. If you're considering a 7-string, then I have to assume you're also considering B standard / drop A, which are the same tuning except for the lowest string, as a home tuning. The reason I say this is because 7-string guitars are tuned exactly like 6 strings, but with an additional string on the bass side, which is a low B. If you drop it a whole step, you get drop A, so this is the most natural tuning to use on a 7-string, since it comes set up from the factory. So here's my advice when it comes to tunings. If you're considering playing anywhere between, say, E standard and drop B, the 7-string doesn't make much sense. Simply put, to use any of these tunings on a 7-string, you'd have to either ignore the low B and down-tune the whole instrument, or tune up. Either option doesn't make much sense, so if you're looking for drop C or drop B, I'd say stick with a 6-string and go for an appropriate set of strings. If you want to sound closer to modern bands like Spiritbox, Sleep Token, Invent Animate and others, you may want to tune much lower than drop C. Maybe drop F sharp or even drop E will be more appropriate to get those sounds. In that case, a 7-string will be much more appropriate than a 6, because 7s usually have a much easier time getting to those low notes. Not only because of their usually longer scale, but because 7-string pickup sets are usually tuned in a way that will favor those low notes. And now comes the more difficult question, at least to me, which is, what if you want to play in drop A? Well, if that's the case, that's the only tuning where I can't decidedly say which instrument is more appropriate right off the bat. All of the higher tunings only make sense in a 6-string, and everything below drop A, in my opinion at least, makes more sense in either a 7 or an 8-string. In the intro, you saw me play a 6-string Ibanez with a 25.5-inch scale tuned to drop A. I was using 12 to 62 gauge Ernie balls, and I tried multiple tunings, but anything below drop A started sounding pretty muddy. And of course, the lower you go, the harder it'll be to make your guitar stand out in a mix. But particularly with 25.5 scales and a 6-string pickup set, things start sounding muddy much earlier than they would in a 7-string with a longer scale. So for me, the natural cutoff point of a 6-string is really drop A / B standard. Anything below makes more sense in a 7, and it'll also save you a lot of grief in the setup process. When I restringed my Ibanez with the Mammoth Slinkies, I ran into multiple issues. First off, the 62 gauge doesn't really fit in the nut slot. And since I don't have the right tools or experience to file the nut, the string is sort of just hanging there, which is obviously not ideal. And second, with strings this big, I can't tune to anything higher than drop A, because the string tension is too much. Even drop B feels too stiff. And going below drop A is not ideal because the pickups start to sound a little muddy. So with this string set, I would say I'm pretty much stuck in drop A, but I could go for something lighter that would fit the nut of the guitar and would also maybe allow me to go to drop B, maybe even drop C. So if that's what you want, then a 6-string with a 25.5 scale and a set of 11 54s, for example, might be right. You get the playability, ergonomics and size of a 6th string, plus you can cover everything from drop A up to maybe drop C. One of the aspects that sometimes differs between 6 and 7 strings is that 7 strings usually, but not always, have a longer scale. Scale length is the distance between the nut and the bridge, and basically determines the amount of tension that is applied to the strings. The more tension on the strings, the less muddy it sounds, but also the more difficult it is to play. Less tension means the strings are easier to play, but the sound becomes less well-defined. To quickly explain the different types of scale lengths out there, the most well-known are the 25.5-inch scale, which I like to think of as the Fender scale, since it's been used on Fender guitars historically, and it's present in the majority of 6-string guitars, including this Ibanez. Then there's the 24.75-inch, or 24 3/4, which is known as the traditional Gibson scale, which you can find on Les Pauls, for example. The difference this scale offers is that Les Pauls are typically much easier to play in general than other guitars. The strings offer much less resistance, and so bending and general playing is a bit easier. Some players love this, others not so much. I'm personally a big fan of the Gibson scale, especially for lead playing. It's also worth noting that PRS uses an intermediate 25-inch scale, which in theory makes playing easier while keeping enough tension so intonation and muddiness don't become a problem. Some 7-string guitars offer a 25.5-inch scale as well, which might make perfect sense if you don't intend on downtuning below drop A. If that's the case, I think it's fine, but if you want to downtune to drop G or drop F sharp or even lower, I think a longer scale such as 26.5 or even 27 might be far more appropriate. But I guess that really depends on the use case you're looking for. And if you still want to go lower, such as F sharp standard / drop E, then the 8th string at a staggering 28-inch scale might be the right call. Meshuggah have been doing it for decades with awesome results. Keep in mind that an extended range instrument will require a period of adaptation. You'll have to learn how to account for 1 or 2 extra strings in your playing. Also, the ergonomics and the weight of a 7th string will also be different. The guitar will be a bit bigger and heavier, so take that into account. So to summarize, you should decide between 6 or 7 strings depending on the tunings you want to play in, mostly. If you want to play between E standard and drop B, stay with the 6th string. If you want to play between drop A and drop F, go to 7 strings and make sure you get at least a 26.5-inch scale if you want to downtune from B standard. If you want the uber low tunings like drop E or double drop D, you can get a 27-inch 7 string or even a full-on 8 string. And lastly, there's also baritone guitars, which are basically 6 or 7 strings with longer scale lengths, like 27-inch. This allows you to stay with the playability of a 6 string and play in super low tunings like drop E. However, for me, I think it adds a layer of unnecessary fiddling and it doesn't interest me as much. Personally, I prefer a simpler solution like a 7 string or an 8 string, but baritone 6s work for some people, so it's a matter of personal choice. If at all possible, I recommend that you go to a store and try the guitar beforehand, whichever one it is. I hope that was a helpful breakdown of the differences between 6 and 7 strings. This is a topic I've been thinking for a while myself, and I haven't gotten myself a 7 string yet, but I might in the future since I'm not completely satisfied with my drop A experience on the 6 string. Anyway, thanks for watching, please remember to subscribe, bye bye.